Okay. I actually don't have a very inspiring story.
That's fine.
I thought becoming a doctor would be, would allow me to have a space where I'm interacting with people a lot more.
Right. Could you talk about like the confidentiality aspect of it? Like,
I mean, it's a universe, it's like a global system that we as psychologists have the ethical code of conduct. We learn that in our degree, in our bachelor's and in our master's. We make sure that we understand that ethical code of conduct and we keep ourselves in check about it as well.
Okay.
When you are first starting off as a psychologist, you are strictly supervised when you're taking sessions.
or whether they're qualified.
Whether they're qualified as well. And I have quite a lot of clients who come up to me they're like, are you married? How can you talk about relationships if you're not married?
Right.
You have kids, how can you talk about parenting otherwise?
Right.
So those kind of questions we need to be prepared.
Legit.
Right. Yeah, we need to be prepared for. They don't even realize that we've actually studied more about it than experienced it as well.
You would encourage people who tried therapy and maybe not been too super happy to give it another chance.
Give it another chance, yeah.
One person's friend is not another person's friend. One person's therapist is not another person's therapist.
Absolutely.
And one person's spouse is not another person's spouse, right?
Absolutely.
From my understanding, counseling therapist or counseling psychologist is somebody who talks to people and helps with a range of problems. But if you feel a problem is specialized and complex, you'll recommend them to a clinical psychologist and maybe then further on to a psychiatrist who can prescribe medication.
Yes.
Got it.
Actually, men's mental health is something that is not very spoken out loud a lot of times, and it's so important to realize that men's mental health also matters.
Right.
They do go through life the same way as women do.
For a long time in India, mental health was a topic that people spoke about in whispers or maybe behind closed doors. But I think today we are seeing a reasonably significant shift. Therapy is no longer viewed as the last resort. People are using it as a tool for personal growth. And today we have someone who's at the forefront of this change. We are going to meet Aisha Rifat, a psychologist at Heart It Out. And she is redefining what it means to be well in today's India. Hi, Aisha. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Strong Brew.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to talk to you today.
I'm very excited about what we're going to discuss about today, just because I'm so curious about the field of psychology. But before we get there, could you maybe just set the stage by talking a little bit about yourself, how you came upon this journey and how you got to, being where you are today professionally?
Okay. I actually don't have a very inspiring story.
That's fine. It's a story.
For me, I feel like the profession of becoming a therapist or the journey to becoming a therapist was very natural. It just happened. Like, I feel like I researched something back when I was in high school, found something interesting, and I just dug deeper into it. I think as a child itself, human beings fascinated me a lot. I found the way people think, the way people behave so different from each other. And that was like, oh, how does this one person behave differently to the same kind of stimulus? So my, journey to just researching about psychology, what it means to interact with people, etc. I initially thought that medicine was the way to go. I thought becoming a doctor would be, would allow me to have a space where I'm interacting with people a lot more.
Right.
And so I attempted NEET. I went through the mainstream of the education system, and eventually I came across a Bachelor's of Science program in psychology honors provided by Christ University, Bangalore. And when I was digging deeper into that field, I realized that this is what I wanted to do.
Correct. It has all the people without the other stuff.
Yeah. And it was exactly what I was thinking about, in terms of profession, in terms of career. So I was like, okay, this is more fascinating to me than medicine. And so I wrote their entrance exam. And when I got into the college, I was like, okay, this is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted to do. And that's how
you are. So maybe just talk a little bit more about what it takes to be a practicing psychologist as you are today. And I know there are many branches of the fields, but maybe just quickly orient me and everyone else.
Okay. So yes, psychology does have a vast amount of branches, so much so that 3 years of bachelor's actually took us, doing all the subjects, predominantly all the subjects to cover all the fields of psychology. So the basic ones are clinical psychology, counseling psychology, organizational psychology, and there are other fields like forensic psychology, legal psychology, that is like way more fascinating and more specific to a particular field.
Right.
But each of it has its own qualifications. Each of it has its own journey to get a degree, journey to practice, etc. And so currently I have a master's in clinical psychology, and I wanted to pursue MPhil and PhD in the future. However, there are some issues with the RCI licensing and a lot of not a lot of clarity based on it. So I decided that let me start off my journey as a therapist in counseling psychology. And when there is a lot more clarity in the whole, RCI system, I feel like, okay, I'll give my hand in clinical psychology after that.
Yeah. So what is this RCI system? And I'm assuming this clarity is because the mental health space is still evolving in India.
Yes, exactly. So the RCI is basically a licensing structure. It's a head of licensing for clinical psychologists, which ensures that the right kind of people are practicing in the field of mental health. So when you have an RCI licensed clinical psychologist, you know that guy is credible.
Understood.
So they provide that credibility. They provide that platform to, to ensure, to reassure people that this is the right kind of quality treatment that you're going to get.
Right.
So that's to establish that system. Of course, India is extremely new to that system, but it's working towards that system. It's making sure that there is structure. It's making sure that there is proper qualification. It is relatively new, like a new direction that India is taking, but I feel like it's a progressing, everything's in progress. So probably
it's getting there. It's in the right direction.
It's getting into the right direction. So eventually in the future, hopefully we do have a better and sustainable system ensuring health and quality, practice for both clinical psychologists and the clients.
Understood. Now, given that the field of psychology is very misunderstood and maybe less understood, what did your family think when you decided to become a psychologist? Were they supportive or did they think, no, what is it that you're doing?
It took them some time to understand and realize what the field was.
Right.
It took them some time to understand and realize what the field was.
Right.
Because there's not a lot of knowledge about it. There's not a lot of exposure to it. But I feel like when I got into the journey of researching about psychology, I simultaneously educated them as well. I educated my family as well.
Right.
And even though we had hiccups in the beginning, right now, they are my biggest cheerleaders. They are extremely supportive, be it my parents, my husband, my in-laws. They push me to do what is right because they know the importance of psychology now.
Got it.
They know the importance
through your
therapy,
experience.
Through my experience. They know the importance of therapy and how it's helping people. So they're like, it's a noble profession. You have to do something for the humanity and we completely support you for it.
Correct. I mean, it's in the same league as doctors in terms of how you're helping people. It's just the methodology of helping people is different.
Yeah. Therapy is a part of the healthcare system. It's a part of the medical healthcare system. It's a little more people-oriented rather than medically oriented.
Right. Mental health and therapy, as far as India is concerned, there's a lot of stigma around it. So frankly speaking, when you speak to maybe people who are of an older generation, they think of, no, that's not something we can do. That's not something people in our families do. Or they feel it's for very serious problems, right? You have mental problems. So first, could you talk about this stigma, especially from the point of view of like religion or spirituality?
Yeah, there is a lot of stigma related to mental health because of the lack of education and awareness about the field itself. A lot of people think that you need to be crazy or you need to be, mentally dysregulated to seek therapy.
Okay.
It's only for those kind of people. That's absolutely not true. It's for everybody and it's for the layman as well.
Right.
Therapy allows you to empower yourself.
Okay.
It gives you a space to express what you cannot express otherwise. And it gives you a stage to feel confident in yourself. So a lot of people have this misconception as well that if you have faith in something, there is no chance that you can be crazy about something or there's no chance that you can have any problems.
Right.
There's a lot of misconception related to that. That's completely untrue. I feel like faith and science go together.
Got it. They're not mutually exclusive.
They're not mutually exclusive. If you believe in something that creates your value system, that creates your belief systems, of course, that is going to help you become a better person in terms of your mental health.
Right.
So it's really important to understand that if you are seeking therapy, it doesn't mean you need to give up your faith.
Right.
And if you are believing in something, it doesn't mean you cannot seek therapy.
Got it.
It can go hand in hand. It can go side by side. So, at Heart It Out, we actually, really promote faith sensitive and culturally sensitive therapy. So when people of different religions come to us, we ensure that their value system and belief system is not questioned.
Understood.
Right?
So you get special training for this?
We don't get special training specifically for it, but that's the awareness.
The culture.
That's something that I need to upskill myself with.
Right.
I need to be aware of these things when my clients are coming.
Right.
So it's my job to educate myself in these terms. So that's when I can be culturally sensitive. I can be faith sensitive. So even if people from different religions come to me, I'm able to understand them within that value system that they have created.
Got it.
At the end of the day, mental health is like, it roots from childhood. So the way you were brought up, the environment that you have been surrounded by, the kind of belief systems that your parents inculcated you with, of course, you are going to take that to your adulthood.
Right.
So we cannot separate that value system from mental health at all. So your
Understood.
faith and mental health has to go together.
Got it. Now, so I'm curious about this. Just like from speaking to my friends and colleagues, I do feel that India is changing and people's attitudes are changing. And especially maybe my friends are more from cities, right? They feel that, oh, no, therapy is something we can do. They're more open to this. Do you feel this? Or like, amongst the clients that you have, do you feel there is a hesitation in coming and talking to you? Like what are some examples, right? Like what have you seen in either?
Okay, maybe I feel like these days there is a lot more education about psychology, especially among the current generation, the current teens and the current young adults. There's a lot more awareness that, okay, this is what therapy is. For the older generation, maybe I do find some hesitancy.
Okay.
I do have clients who come up to me and it's their first session and they have no idea what they want to talk about because they don't know what therapy
is. But why
is.
did they sign up then?
Curiosity, like exploration. They've probably heard that this helps, so they want to give it a try. They've probably heard somewhere that, this is also a form of healing, also a form of treatment. So
maybe someone just recommended, said it helped me.
Exactly. It probably helped them. Or they would have read something about it. These days, we as psychologists, we're really trying our best to, talk about it and educate people about it. And that's really important for us to break that stigma as well.
Right.
So that curiosity kind of brings them. And a lot of times they come, they sit in a session and they're like, I have no idea what to talk about.
Right.
And
what do you do then?
Oh, we just crack up a very general conversation, make them comfortable, try to understand, have a,
it's like a first meeting of friends, a first date or something.
Yeah, something like that. And we try to, understand where they're coming from, what they're doing. We ask questions in a more, that have more theoretical basis to it. Right. They wouldn't be really aware of that.
Right. For example? For
example, like even if the question such as, how are you? It's probably coming from it seems common to you, but it's actually coming from a rooted theoretical practice of building rapport with somebody.
Okay.
So those things are, come sort of naturally to psychologists because we've been learning about it for so many years in our education system. But that gives us an insight into the other person. That gives us more information into the other person. And based on that, when we ask follow-up questions, they realize, oh, this person is curious about me.
They feel good.
They feel safe enough, comfortable enough to share it with me.
Right.
Then first session goes up and the following sessions, they find more confidence to come and they're like, okay, maybe I can talk about this and I will feel good about it. Maybe I can get some insight into this topic, this part of my life, and I'll feel good about it.
Right.
So they come, they explore, and when they see the power of therapy, they realize, okay, this is something that I've always wanted to do.
So actually, before that, just so that people are comfortable with the idea of therapy for those, who've not sought it out for fear of, feeling embarrassed or wondering whether it's confidential. Could you talk about like the confidentiality aspect of it? Like I know we hadn't discussed this before, but you should maybe just discuss like how you keep things confidential or like what are your rules, right? What are psychologists' rules around confidentiality?
We do have, it's a universe, it's like a global system that we as psychologists have, the ethical code of conduct. We learn that in our degree, in our bachelor's and in our master's. We make sure that we understand that ethical code of conduct and we keep ourselves in check about it as well.
Okay.
When you are first starting off as a psychologist, you are strictly supervised when you're taking sessions, just to make sure that
someone else will be listening in.
Not listening in, but you making sure that you are on the right track or asking the right questions. You can always consult your supervisor about.
Understood.
But client details, client identity, all information is always going to be protected, and it's always going to be confidential.
Even with your family?
Even with obviously with my family, even with my organization.
Oh.
Nobody in my organization will ever know what I'm talking with my client. However, if I ever feel stuck about a particular client, I have no idea how to proceed. And while protecting their identity, if I'm able to get some insights from my colleagues, they're more than willing to help about it.
Understood.
But all that documentation, all the records, it's specifically I keep it.
Understood.
Nobody else has access to it. And even when we are talking about those cases, because it's education for my colleagues as well, right? Okay,
right.
I've met a client who's going through this. This
right.
is a case that I've got. Have you all gone through something like this?
Right.
And when they give their insights, I have much more learning and clarity on how to deal with my client now.
Correct.
So in a very protected environment, protective manner, we make sure that we're discussing things to expand our horizons. But any other information is always confidential.
Got it. So people, when they come to you, see, when you go to a friend, if you trust the friend, you know your secrets or your discussions are safe, right? Yeah. But that's only to the extent that you trust the friend.
Right.
Whereas with a psychologist, it's their code of ethics and their professionalism and their reputation that is at stake.
Yeah.
Because if there's a chance that you misuse the information that's given to you, you're basically done as a psychologist.
Exactly. If I lose my credibility, I mean, any psychologist would not be trusted anymore. And I feel like it is, it puts the rest of the profession in harm's way as well.
Right.
People stop trusting in the
profession as a whole.
Yeah, profession as a whole. People stop trusting in the process of therapy, right? They're like, okay, one therapist. That's one of the sad realities that they have. Like a lot of times clients have gone to therapy. They've trusted the process. They've trusted like, okay, they've risked everything and they're like, let's give it a chance. And the therapist would not have been the right fit for them, where a lot of things, very sad things would have happened sad experiences would have happened.
Right. Because I guess therapists are human as well. And
as well, they're probably not educated enough. Qualification plays a role as well.
Right.
And still, when people are putting their vulnerabilities out there, we as therapists need to be very conscious about it. We need to be very aware, very educated about that as well. We're dealing with another human being. We cannot be insensitive about it at all.
Right.
So it takes a leap of faith for the client. So we need to protect that leap of faith.
Right. This is hard. I mean, I guess you have to have a certain mentality before you can enter this field, and it must be weeding out people, right? They come in with, thinking this is like, sometimes you just get into a profession without realizing the implications, and I'm sure you do a few counseling sessions and you realize.
Yeah, exactly. I can never emphasize the importance of education in that matter.
Okay.
A qualified professional, a qualified therapist does have a bachelor's and a master's degree, basic. That's the basic education that they can have.
Okay.
But we do have a lot of, a lot of people who take like a 6-month course in counseling psychology and then
it seems easy.
It seems easy. They claim themselves to be counselors and people trust those, those clients trust those people and go into that.
Correct.
And have a very bad experience with it. That's something that we as therapists try to avoid as much as possible. We ensure quality treatment. We ensure quality. The profession needs to be of quality at that point. So we need to make sure that we are educated enough to educate others.
Correct. And I guess, so before someone goes in for therapy, they should, research the organization they're tying up with, if there is an organization involved, or the therapist themselves.
Earlier, the field of psychology, we as therapists were complete blank slates. No, none of the clients knew whom they were talking to, and I feel like that was a level of comfort that they would approach with.
Right.
But now, because of social media, LinkedIn, and which is extremely important, they do some background checks on their therapist just to make sure that whether or not they're the right fit.
Right. Or whether they're qualified.
Whether they're qualified as well. And I have quite a lot of clients who come up to me they're like, are you married? How can you talk about relationships if you're not married?
Right.
You have kids. How can you talk about parenting otherwise?
Right.
So those kind of questions we need to be prepared for.
Legit.
Right. Yeah, we need to be prepared for. They don't even realize that we've actually studied more about it than experienced it as well.
Correct.
So the content.
And they have to be comfortable with that mix.
Yes. And not every therapist is for every client. Okay. You need to find your fit. And you do that by taking a chance with the therapist. You go for one session, you like the therapist, you click with it, great. That's a bonus for you.
Right.
If you don't click with the client, it's okay. You can always take a chance with somebody else because you might find them more relatable than this.
Correct.
So there is no one word answer for these things. So you need to.
Correct.
I'm very proud of my clients for taking the chances with therapy sometimes, even when they have had bad experiences with other therapists.
Right.
So it's a chance sometimes. Yeah.
Understood. So you would encourage people who've tried therapy and maybe not been too super happy to give it another chance. Because
Another chance, yeah.
one person's friend is not another person's friend. One person's therapist is not another person's therapist.
Absolutely.
And one person's spouse is not another person's spouse, right?
Absolutely.
So I guess all these relationships are very important in their own ways, right? They have their place. So there's also this misconception. I feel like I spoke about this, but maybe that it's again, therapy is for people with serious mental health issues and not for somebody who's just struggling with life, right? Everyone struggles with life's problems, small or big, whether it's in-law trouble or professional trouble or friend trouble or boyfriend trouble or girlfriend trouble, whatever it is, right? Would you like to talk about this and maybe just talk about the mix of clients that you see? Like how many of them have serious issues or what percentage, obviously, versus regular issues, and what are the regular issues? Because
I feel like one thing we need to understand is therapy is for everybody, regardless of the problems that you have. You have a major problem that you would define as a major problem, then it's a problem to you and you come. If you feel like you don't have a problem at all, but you just want to give therapy a try, most welcome. Come have a chat. Just, let yourself out sometimes. And if that helps, then that's great. You don't need to have a problem to start therapy. It's for everybody. I would recommend therapy for everybody. Give it a try. Right. And once you are in therapy, in the sessions, and when you find how beneficial it is, how powerful it is, the process itself, and how uplifting it is for you, when you experience that yourself, you find it more comfortable to be like, okay, now I can, I feel confident in myself. I'm able to go ahead with therapy. I do get a lot of clients who do have very serious mental health disorders.
Okay. So like what's the percentage?
I would personally, because I'm a counseling psychologist, I would say I would get about 10 to 15% compared to
only 10 to 15% have serious mental.
No, I wouldn't. That's not exactly how I would put it. Because I'm a counseling psychologist, I get 10 to 15%.
Understood.
In a clinical setting, you would find a lot more people with major issues going and approaching them.
Understood.
With counseling psychologists, sometimes the first thing that would come to your mind is to go to a doctor. You're a general physician.
Right.
So we are the general physicians of the profession.
Understood.
Then the physician would recommend, okay, you have, seems like a problem that requires a specialty, and they would recommend them to a particular specialty.
Understood.
So we would do the same thing. If we find a client who has, major disorders like mood disorders or schizophrenia or any of those major medical disorders that are there in the DSM-5, we would be like, as a counseling psychologist, I would recommend you to either go to a clinical psychologist or go for psychiatric help. Because for your case, it's important.
Right.
We make sure that we, deal with individual cases as individuals as their own cases and plan and curate things around them. So we don't generalize it for everybody. Come to me, your problems are different from another person's problems.
Right.
So of course, I'm going to curate the treatment plan for you.
Right.
I'm not going to generalize it. And depending on that, we recommend them to appropriate professionals as well.
Understood. So from my understanding, counseling therapist or counseling psychologist is somebody who talks to people and helps with a range of problems. But if you feel a problem is specialized and complex, you'll recommend them to a clinical psychologist and maybe then further on to a psychiatrist who can prescribe medication.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. And psychiatrists also, I guess, meet people and discuss, but they also have the ability to prescribe drugs. They are MD.
They have the license to prescribe medicines, and they do therapy as well. They do assessments as well. They do diagnosis as well.
Okay.
It depends upon your fit. If you feel like I want to talk to a psychiatrist and somebody who has a medical background, absolutely, you can approach them as well. But if you feel like, medicines is probably not my way and I just want to do psychotherapy, then you approach either a clinical psychologist or a counseling psychologist.
Understood. Understood. So there's a range of options available.
Absolutely.
Now, as far as regular problems go, now, the reason I ask this is, I don't know what regular problems are, right? As defined in a more general way. I know what my problems are, right? But defined in a general way, like what kind of help, like people coming to you, what are they seeking help for? Right?
Got it. Yeah. I think for us to better understand this, we need to see specific age groups. Okay. Each age group has a different basis for a particular disorder. For example, between the ages of 0 to 12, during the childhood, you will see a predominance of ADHD, of autism, of defined behaviors and those kinds of children-based disorders. Those we get a lot of clients who are in that particular category.
Understood.
Among teenagers, you will see identity confusion, teenagers.
Like gender identity?
gender identity, personal identity, they're still figuring their way out in the world.
Right.
They're trying to understand what do they want to do career-wise, what do they want to do relationship-wise. They're going through major physical changes as well.
Correct.
How do I deal with that? So in teenagers, we see those kind of daily
Angst,
struggles.
I guess.
Yeah, angst, peer pressure, family pressure. And among young adults, you'll probably see okay, they've got into the workforce. How do I do work-life balance? How do I deal with my relationships while doing work-life balance? So those kind of problems are more predominant.
Okay.
Older adults and, over the age of 35, 40 and stuff, you will see, problems with their children, how to understand their children better, how to parent their children better, how to balance out your family life with your work life.
Right.
They're also looking after their parents at the same time.
Yes.
So how do I manage two different generations?
Correct. They're the sandwich generation.
In between, what do I do? Feeling a lot of overwhelming feelings, a lot of anxiety in that kind of situations. So each age group, eventually towards the older age group, you'll have empty nest feelings. Their parents, no parents to take care of, neither are the children with them, feeling loneliness, feeling lack of companionship. So various age groups have various predominant of problems. Now, each of these problems can obviously, it's flexible. You probably see a teenager or a young adult with ADHD as well these days.
Right.
So of course it does, leak into the other age groups, but we see a predominance of these.
Right. It's not stereotyping, but it's still, you've seen these are the
predominant
trends.
Trends, correct. The right word.
Got it. Now, also, let's talk about it. You get a lot of people from the metro cities, from small towns, international clients. How does it work?
Yeah. At Heart It Out, we actually provide, we provide services all over the world. Okay. No matter which corner of India you are, which corner of the world you are, you have access to therapy, online therapy from our organization. But in a more trends wise, I would say, of course, metropolitan cities do have a lot more awareness and education about these platforms. They have a lot more access to these platforms and resources to, access them as well. So, for me personally, my clientele are from metropolitan cities and not only in India, but all over the world. I have a lot of clients who are coming from the UAE, from the US, and we've provided we've tried to make it as accessible to everybody as possible.
Right.
From the more smaller towns, of course, people do want to explore the field of therapy. Maybe it hasn't reached them. Maybe it hasn't reached, them at that point, or probably, they're still waiting for somebody to introduce to them, right?
Right.
So our job is
make it acceptable.
Make it acceptable, make it accessible. So our job as therapists is to make sure that people in every corner of the world have access to it, have education about it. I've also seen a predominance of clients who are from small towns but settled in metropolitan cities.
Right.
Those have, they're suddenly open to this new world of therapy, and when they go back home and spread it to their family,
that's when the awareness will grow.
Yeah, that's how it would grow.
Got it. You did say that you have a lot of clients from the Middle East, and here is it because they identify with you as a Muslim?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
They feel you will understand their problems better, their home life better.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. We've probably they would assume that we've been through this similar cultural upbringing, similar religious upbringing. So, of course, I relate to those clients in a much better manner. I'm able to empathize and understand those clients.
It's like that at my home, right?
Right, exactly. I've been through this as well. And they understand me. They're like, oh my God, my therapist is actually saying what exactly I relate to.
Correct.
And I have clients from the Middle East, from Kashmir, from, I do have a variety of clients from various demographic backgrounds, but such clients who are Muslim women usually come and approach me because they find comfort. Yeah. They find okay, they feel like there's someone on my side. There's someone who understands me, who looks like me, and they probably understand what I'm going through. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now I'm very curious. You obviously have different diverse clientele, right? It's not like you talk to one kind of person, and there's a mix of males and females.
Yes.
Could you give some examples of problems that are very specific to, say, women first, and then talk about men?
Actually, I think it depends from person to person. It's maybe gender wise, I probably would have noticed a trend, but usually women come with problems such as emotional regulation. How do I manage my emotions? How do I not let that affect me? Or how do I, balance between things? Like I want to be a career woman, but at the same time, I need to take care of my house, need to take care of my kids. How do I do both? Or women, a lot of them come for actually parenting advice. I've seen that more than men. that they care a little bit. Okay, how am I treating my child? How am I, behaving with my child? Why is my child this way? They notice that.
Is it my fault?
Is it my fault? My fault, I think, comes very later. But then they realize that, okay, my child is doing this. Is this? Am I doing the right thing?
Correct.
Am I accommodating to that? So I feel like they are little more, empathetic to other people, and women also probably may come from like family problems, lack of support. They find in this world that they have to do things on their own and stand up on their own, and that's overwhelming for them.
Of course.
So those kind of issues are usually predominant in women.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about men? Some examples?
Men, it's work-life balance. Like work is stressing me out. I'm coming home is stressing me out. Financial issues. I'm in debt. I'm in, how do I, get a job, employment, and how do I make sure I'm supporting my family? Like,
right.
Am I doing enough for my family? There's a lot of self-doubt that comes with like, I don't think I'm contributing enough to the family.
Okay.
And a lot
they feel sense of responsibility.
Yeah, a lot of responsibility, a lot of accountability. And at the same time, they don't realize that they're getting hurt emotionally.
Okay.
But, eventually
I guess men are supposed to be strong. So
that's how the, stereotype goes, that men cannot cry or, women cannot get angry. When they're trying to understand that, hold on, I am feeling sad, but I'm not allowed to express it. I am feeling overwhelmed with work, but I don't know who to express it to. And they come for some sort of reassurance and like re-guiding to therapy. And that's when they realize, oh, it's okay to have emotions, and it's okay to express them in the right manner. Mm-hmm. So those kind of issues, they come very predominantly like lack of routine, lack of motivation to work, motivation to do things in life. So those kind of things you will see predominant in men. Yeah.
Got it. So now let's categorize women as maybe slightly older women. I can imagine older women come to you for parenting issues. What about if I'm 25, I'm living an urban life, I'm a woman. What are the kind of problems that you'd see in a person like me?
A lot of, funnily, I thought identity formation would come like earlier in, during your teenage years. But even back then, you are sort of under the protection of your parents. So
right.
You kind of go through it. At the early 20s, like till about 25, 26, you are like suddenly put out in the world and you're figuring things out by yourself.
Correct.
Predominantly. So I think most of the 25-year-olds are usually coming in for like, how am I surviving? Am I doing adulthood right? Maintaining friendships. And now there's also a lot of pressure to get married. Mm-hmm. So they're looking for relationships. They're looking for the right relationships, someone to settle with, etc. So 25-year-olds, it's a very complex age where they're figuring out work, life, and relationships at the same time.
Got it. Yeah. Got it. That's very interesting. So let's say a client comes to you, and sorry, I have to tell the audience that I wasn't sure whether people who come to take psychotherapy are clients or patients, and you actually clarified it very nicely. So do you just want to do that?
Yeah. So we use the word clients. We don't treat them as patients. We treat them as human beings. As a counseling psychologist or a clinical psychologist, but patients is more of a medical term.
Right.
So if you have a medical disorder and, you've gone for some sort of medical help, we refer them to as patients.
Got it. So if you've gone for treatment for schizophrenia or something like that, then you're a patient.
You're a patient, yeah.
But if you're coming for regular everyday problems and just trying to get unstuck in your routine, clients.
It's clients. Actually, both words can be interchangeable. There is no right or wrong way of referring to it. I think it's very natural for us therapists to, differentiate. They're like, okay, this is a client, this is what we refer patient. But there is no absolute to
it. The reason I asked is because I was genuinely confused. So what do I say? Okay, cool. No, it was enlightening to me. So I'm hoping the audience feels the same. And okay, now I'm young and I have something going on professionally and I'm getting pressurized to get married. And I come to you for the first session. Like, how do you get someone like this to open up? Right? What do you do? What does the first session look like?
Okay. First session is just getting to know each other. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, for the client, I'm a stranger.
Right.
So they're still figuring out whether or not I should trust this person.
Mm-hmm.
Is this person credible? So they're also figuring me out as I'm figuring them out.
They're evaluating you.
They're evaluating me, making sure that I'm, what they want, it's there in me. Mm-hmm. So first session is usually, them trying to figure me out. Right. So I kind of allow myself to do that. I ask questions about their daily life. I ask questions about what is troubling them at that point, etc. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of hesitancy in the first session, but we try to create as comfortable of a space for them at that moment. be it in person or online.
Okay.
So first session is usually building rapport. It's trying to understand the client and allowing the client to understand you and trust you.
Right.
There's a lot that goes on for about 1 or 2 sessions. And after that, when they are more comfortable enough to talk about it, they eventually open about their problems.
Understood.
That this is what I've been feeling. This is how I've been going through life. And this is how it's come, and I have no idea what to do about it. And eventually we sort of, probe them with certain questions, or, allow them a space to, sit with their feelings and make them comfortable in their own presence first.
Right.
And that's when we realize, okay, there is some sort of underlying childhood trauma related to this that they may not have realized. Maybe something has happened in their workspace that they may not have realized that is affecting them right now. Then we realize that, okay, there is some sort of like lack of balance in their life. Like they don't know, what am I supposed to do throughout my day? How do I become productive? How do I be efficient? How do I do it without stressing myself out? So all of those things, first few sessions just go with questioning and understanding the client.
Got it.
Then with the help of the client, we discuss what the major issue is. We prioritize it. We deal with one problem at a time. And then we suggest, okay, what do you think you want to do about this? I personally use a client-centered form of therapy.
Okay.
That means that the client is actually the one leading the therapy sessions.
Understood.
So I'm just a shadow guiding behind.
Right.
That's my job that I usually do. And the client realizes that this is what they want to do. They find themselves a little confident with their decisions. And then we discuss those decisions. We make sure, like, okay, how do I try this out?
Right.
How do I, inculcate this in my life?
Right.
So all of that does, go step by step in the process of therapy. It is not done once and for all.
It's not a one shot.
It's not a
one
one
shot. Anything.
That will be very
Ongoing.
overwhelming for a lot of clients. If they come in the first session, I'm telling them what to do in the first session itself. Throughout the week, they'll go confused, like, am I supposed to breathe? Am I supposed to journal? Am I supposed to do?
Right.
So a lot of things get very overwhelming. So we try one thing at a time. We curate according to the client's needs, according to the client's problems. And one client is different from another client.
Right.
So if, journaling works for you, journaling may not work for somebody else.
Right.
So we allow that space to explore. We allow that
Got
space
it.
to be like, okay, we'll see what works for you.
Right.
And when you become consistent in therapy, you see major and amazing changes in people. And they like, there's a lot of times when people come after to, like, towards the 6-7 session, they're like, you know what, I feel very confident in my decisions. And every time I feel like I'm anxious, you come in my head. And that makes me really happy that,
You're kind of speaking.
Yeah. They're like, okay, so they were listening, and that just makes you like really like,
You're seeing results.
Yeah.
Okay. So sometimes you may just have a client who is basically, you feel that the solution to their problems is very simple. And the example I'd given you was a friend of mine who would keep ending up in very toxic relationships, and she would come and talk to her friends, and it was very hard for me to say, but that's a loser guy. Why are you with him? It's very easy. You can fix your life by not being with him, but it's obviously not as easy as that, right? There's a reason, something driving her. And, but the fixes seem straightforward to us, right? We are no one's qualified to judge someone's life, but how do you tackle this, right? If they're not doing the right thing and the right thing is so obvious.
Yeah. I don't see clients as the whole race of human beings. If a client comes up to me and tells me that so and so, I'm in such and such relationship, and this is what I'm going through, they may not want a solution at that point. They may not want to hear, hey, why don't you just leave him kind of solution. And that may seem an obvious answer to me.
Right.
That may not be the same situation for them. So we as therapists, we need to be as non-judgmental as possible, as objective as possible. I cannot let my biases reflect on that person's opinion. If they are talking about it, I take it as important.
Right.
If they were in a healthy relationship, maybe they wouldn't have found the reason to talk about it at all.
Correct.
But if they're talking about it, they may be putting it out in a healthy manner, but somewhere they want to understand, okay, what is my perspective on it? So they may put out and they may probe me to, okay, I want to know what your suggestion about this is.
Right.
If I give them an answer immediately, they're not going to come back. They're probably going to take offense to it.
Right.
So we as therapists never provide solutions.
Okay.
We don't advise.
So I'm not going to get a solution if I come.
You're not going to get a solution directly. We suggest and empower so that you figure out the solution by yourself.
Got it.
So we do it predominantly in a questioning manner, by talking about it, by understanding the importance of it. So when we are asking, for example, your friend who's in a toxic relationship, when I ask her, what do you like about that man? Or what do you not like about that man? And when she's telling these things, she's also realizing that, oh, this is what I think about my man. And eventually we ask questions like, okay, why do you feel like you're in that kind of relationship? She becomes aware immediately and she realizes, oh, I'm questioning my decisions now.
Right.
So we provide that space for people to think from different perspectives about one particular solution.
Right.
And we don't agree to anything, disagree to anything. We try to stay as objective, as neutral as possible.
Right.
So when the client is exploring these thoughts that they have, they're now thinking about their life and thinking about what is beneficial for them, what is good for them.
Right.
So we allow them a space to feel and think.
Right.
Eventually they realize that, okay, hold on.
Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking of it. I mean, then it doesn't feel like somebody else's decision thrust upon me, right? It's my own decision, which is very, very empowering because people like to feel that they are making their decisions. And another, I think what you said, something which kind of, that's why I was like perked up, is what I realize is, I guess with therapy, at least, see, if you talk to a friend or especially if you talk to your family here in India, it's very judgmental in a way, saying, just do this, right? Don't do this or do this. And what are you doing? And even your friends may do that, especially if you keep going back to the same, you're in a cycle, right? After a year, your friend is going to get annoyed too.
Yeah.
Because there's a limit to their patience, but you guys are trained to basically, even if it goes on for a year, maybe it's going to take 2 years.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. But you see that there's often light at the end of the tunnel, even after a long period.
I feel like we need to look at the light in order for us to show the light to the clients as well. Timing depends from person to person. Like some people may realize it very early in the sessions. Some people may take a very long time to realize it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we really encourage and reassure that at the end of the day, whatever you're thinking is for your own good.
Right.
So trust yourself.
Right.
And sometimes that may allow them to little things like, okay, my decision, maybe I should trust it. Am I doing it for my own benefit? They start questioning their own beliefs and thoughts. That's important for them to, choose what is good for them, what is right for them. Yeah.
Correct. Okay. Now let's talk about men who come to you for therapy. And obviously now you can identify with women in a certain way because I guess maybe you encountered all of this in a certain way, right? And their men's problems are very different. And how do you identify with those and help them solution those? I know you are not solutioning, but yeah.
Yeah. Men's mental health is something that is not very spoken out loud a lot of times. And it's so important to realize that men's mental health also matters.
Right.
They do go through life the same way as women do.
Right.
We may have differences in roles. We may have differences in the way we do things, but they are also going through some sort of stress. We need to be empathetic about that.
Right.
A lot of times people think that men are rational, women are emotional.
Right.
I beg to differ. I think men do have emotions as well. They are probably not provided the space to express it appropriately.
Right.
That's the only thing. For them, they don't realize that, I've got clients who come up to me and they say, my girlfriend has been feeling this. I have no idea what that feeling is.
Okay.
And
so what do you do then?
So we do have certain steps to go understand that, you're also feeling an emotion, but you're not able to name it as of now. So we go through certain techniques of an emotion wheel, about emotional recognition, about emotional processing and expression, step by step. In each session. And, we first allow them to recognize what you're feeling. You're feeling something, put a name to it.
Right.
That's when you realize, okay, hold on, I'm feeling angry. Now, if I'm feeling angry, how do I express it?
Right.
I can't go on a road rage and shout at everybody. That's not, that's not helpful to me. So what do I do? How do I regulate that? That's when they come to therapy and they realize, okay, this is how anger is regulated. This is how sadness is regulated. It's okay for me to cry. It's okay for me to let myself out. Even if it's not to a therapist, it's okay for me to trust that there is somebody out there who's willing to listen to me.
Right.
So those things needs to be, educated to men in general. And we as women or the rest of the population, regardless of gender, need to be empathetic about it as well.
Correct.
They are going through life the same way we are.
Right.
We need to understand that.
Right. And they're under different pressures as well.
Yeah, so, of course. Their roles are different.
Right.
They, maybe from birth or from traditions.
Nurture.
They're providers. They need to have responsibility over family. That's such a huge burden, actually. That's something that they need to be so cautious about. It feels like a huge responsibility. I do have young men, like teenagers and all, coming up to me and saying, oh, I'm like, they're figuring their way out towards to start up a career or like, go into the education system. And they're so confused because there's this pressure of being stable before the age of 25.
Got it.
Yeah.
I don't know where they get these numbers from, but I guess the expectations, societal expectations.
Exactly. Societal expectations. So it's very important that we as therapists provide a space for men as well to make sure that they can express their, express their feelings, set boundaries, allowing them to say no whenever they don't feel like it, or, at least choosing a space where you're like, okay, I can be myself.
Right.
That's the most important for them. So it's important that we talk about it and, educate people about it.
Right.
Yeah.
And okay. So just in general, from your experience with dealing with the issues that men and women have, what are 3 practical tips that you could kind of give all women?
That's
too general.
Yeah, too general. I mean, let's
you can not slot and pick.
Yeah, let me not base it on particularly because of my clients, but I feel like in general, to all human beings, whoever is out there, I feel like best advice is one, seek therapy. If you have a problem, if you don't have a problem, just come, talk, get some clarity, and you find that confidence within yourself to move on.
Right.
Try therapy. 1. 2, if you feel like your life looks a little bit messy and you don't know what you're doing, try setting up routines for yourself. It's really important to set up routines. I mean, as a child, our parent has, our parents have, trained children to be like, you have to sleep at this hour, you have to wake up at this hour, you have to eat at this hour. And as children, we followed it. We're like, okay, that routine. Suddenly, as an adult, you are being your own parent, right? You don't realize that.
Correct. You don't realize that a routine is needed.
Yes. And it's really important to be, to be routinous. However, there is you need to be flexible with the routine as well.
Okay.
That's important. You cannot be like, a lot of people feel like it's all or nothing. You either do like an entire army drill or you don't do anything at all.
Right.
But finding balance is really, really important in that routine.
Okay.
So you need to be flexible with your routines. If you feel like, I need to finish 10 projects in one day, that's not realistic. So set realistic goals when you're, creating your routines. It helps, at least to understand, okay, I have this time to play. I have this time to indulge in interests and hobbies, and I have this time to work. When you set that, you feel like, okay, I'm using my time in the right way.
Right.
So these would be like general things.
Basic life skills. Whether you're a guy or a girl.
Yeah, doesn't matter of any gender. This is important in terms of just setting a lifestyle for yourself. When you feel healthy within your own body and mind, you know that no matter what problems come, you have the confidence to tackle it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. This is true.
Yeah.
Okay. What about 2-3 pieces of advice you'd give to men in general? Like based on like just your experience, your studies, right? It doesn't have to be based on your clients. In general, you've been analyzing human beings for a while. So.
Okay. With men, I feel like we just need to, we as women need to be patient with men.
Okay.
So I would advise men to also have patience back. It's really difficult to be patient in today's world.
Right.
We're hustling these days. There's a hustle culture that's going on. Everyone's rushing to get somewhere. Nobody knows where the destination is.
Correct.
But we're all rushing. We're all pushing ourselves. So I feel like patience and take your time doing it. Second thing I would say is it's okay to not be okay. You don't need to.
Especially for guys, right?
Especially for men. If you don't feel okay, then you don't feel okay. And that's okay.
Yeah.
For you to talk
it's
about
not unmanly to not feel okay.
Yeah. I feel like it goes for both, for all genders as well. Like if you're not feeling okay, you're not feeling okay. If it's important to you, it's important to you. No matter what the other person is telling you, no matter what the other person is minimizing your problems for, if you don't feel good in it, you don't feel good in it, and it's okay to accept that.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess acceptance is the first step towards.
Awareness is the first.
Okay. Awareness is
first.
First.
You need to recognize that you're feeling this way.
Right.
Then you accept that you're feeling this way. And then you act. So it's awareness, acceptance, action.
Got it.
Yeah.
And I guess it's a journey. Even after action, there is something. Yeah. Okay. Now, in terms of parenting, and you say it's women who are seeking out parenting advice and parenting help, just making sure they're doing the right thing. And like especially in India, but maybe all over the world,
Mm.
fathers are more emotionally distant from their kids, or they only do certain things with their kids.
Mm.
Maybe actually, I think this is changing, but it's there. Like, what do you think of these? Do you think this is true? And if it's true, how can men address this?
I beg to differ. I don't think that men are not emotionally available to their children. I feel like they do try their best to be emotionally available to their children, but their method may be different
Right.
than men.
Okay.
I feel like we as women, we're very out there when we're expressing emotions.
Right.
But men would be a little more silent while doing it.
Right.
They still care. They still want the best for their family. They want the best for their wives or their children. And maybe the way they do it is not as visible for us.
Right.
But they're probably doing their best.
Right.
Like if you ever ask your parents, why have you never hugged me, or why have you never, said, I love you to you? The older generation, it's not very common.
Yeah.
But they would have said like, but I gave you food. I gave you your favorite toy.
That's true.
That's their way of showing love.
Yes.
So I feel like men just show love in a different manner.
I feel you just described my parents. My mom gave me food, my dad gave me toys.
Yeah. Everyone has a different way of expressing love. We expect it in different ways as well. Sometimes we expect our parent to love us by hugging us or by, saying, I love you. But they're probably doing it in a different manner that we are not recognizing.
Right. You have to learn that language.
Yeah, it's important to be aware of those languages.
Got it. Now I'm very curious, because you're a psychologist, has it helped you with your relationship, with your family, with your husband?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. My knowledge about psychology, about human beings.
Do they feel you're like analyzing them?
No, I've kind of warned them beforehand. Like I am not reading your mind. I am not analyzing you. I'm just listening and curious about what you have to say.
Right.
And yes, my parents are much more open to me. My relationship with my parents have improved a lot.
Is it?
Yeah, it's absolutely. They're so much more, aware and a lot more open to talking to their children. And they're also curious. Oh, it's fascinating what you do.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah. It's so nice. Like, and sometimes if they feel low, if they feel, this thing, they come to me, they talk about it and stuff. I have a lot of family members who've come to me. They come in curiosity of like, oh, you're a psychologist, what do you do? And I tell them what I do. And then they express themselves unknowingly. As soon as they finish talking, they realize, you know what, Aisha feels so great after talking to you. Like, I have no idea I was holding on to this. I felt like a very disoriented way. I didn't realize I was disoriented. Yeah. But the moment I spoke to you, I felt such a relief. And I'm like, that's what therapy does.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
That's exactly what I do. That's my job.
Yeah, it's awesome. That's pretty cool, because because you were accessible to them as a family member.
True.
They lucked out, right? They didn't have to seek therapy.
But I feel like that's what gave them the awareness of it as well.
Right.
Now they are my advocates. They
Correct.
go to their friends and their friends' kids and tells, you have a problem, go to my daughter. She's going to help you out.
Right.
They're my biggest cheerleaders right now.
No, and it's not just for you, right? Maybe they'll seek out another therapist, but you're helping someone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't encourage them to come to me. I encourage them to seek therapy.
Right.
Regardless of whoever it is. Just give it a try. See how you feel about it.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's say somebody has been working with you for quite a bit of time. And how do you know they've made progress? I mean, sometimes they'll tell you, right? Oh, I'm feeling great and so on. But other times, if they were able to verbalize so well, maybe they're not, they don't need to seek therapy in the first place. Like, wow, how do you tell?
I don't, when I'm planning things for my clients, I tell them that progress is ups and downs.
Okay.
There is no straight line for progress. There are going to be days that you feel amazing. There are going to be days that you feel absolutely low. That is also progress.
Okay.
I assure them that almost in the first and second session itself.
Okay.
Like, don't worry about getting somewhere.
Right.
Don't worry about, am I improving?
Right.
There are going to be days that you don't feel like you've done your best. I've had a couple of clients who have felt amazing after 6 and 7 sessions. They're like, you know what, I feel so good. I feel amazing. 8th session, they come and I feel like I'm back in square one.
Oh.
And we reassure them saying that that's also progress. That's you're not exactly back in square one, but you've had a hiccup in your way. You've had a challenge that you had to face. But we've discussed this in our previous sessions. Do you have the confidence to overcome it by yourself?
Right.
And then they think about it. They're like, oh yeah, we've discussed this before. Can I do this by myself? No. Okay. Can you help me out? Of course. We can continue sessions a little bit more and we talk about a little bit more. Then they find their confidence. They find the motivation to do it by themselves. So there is no absolute to it. And people progress in different paces as well. A lot of people I see like, okay, after 3 sessions, they feel great. Some people after 12, 13 sessions also, they're still stuck in the same loop.
Right.
Do not force yourself to improve.
Okay.
Just allow yourself to be. Allow yourself to just sit with what you have. You are different from other human beings.
Right.
So don't force yourself.
Right. So there's no comparison. There's no race.
Yeah, there's no race.
Competition.
Nope, absolutely. You don't have to think about whether or not I'm improving.
Got
Doing
it.
my best.
Got it. Well, it's actually liberating in a way, right?
Yeah.
Because we've made this entire life a race about something or the other,
Yeah.
right? Race to get married, race to be the best in your profession. I don't know what else. We race for everything.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Yeah, race for school admission.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. And God knows how many more admissions in our lives.
Yeah. As soon as our education gets over, our kids' admission process starts. You're always in the loop.
Exactly. Therapy is expensive, right? And maybe the people who need it most may find it unaffordable. Like, can you just talk a little bit about that? And, why is that the case? And is there a way that, access can be improved?
Access can definitely be improved. I mean, I did find this as a concern when I was seeking therapy back in my college days.
Okay.
I was like, oh my God, why are therapists so expensive? Especially when I'm not working, I'm not earning. How do I afford it? Now that I'm on the other side, I kind of understand it in larger perspective, because at the end of the day, this is also our
profession,
our bread,
yeah,
our daily bread. We need to earn, and we've spent so much on education. We've spent on quality education. We've not gotten the easy way out.
Right.
So at the psychologist or therapy is a service that we provide.
Right.
Right. And if you are seeking any other service, you'll obviously pay for it. Now, why is it so expensive is because of the duration, I would say. Like, if you go to a doctor, how much would you pay for a doctor's consultation?
It depends on the doctor, I guess. Yeah.
But somewhere around
500, 600 for a visit. Yeah.
How long do you spend time with that?
10 minutes.
Yeah. So we are barely. And they are able to do that analysis within that 10 minutes. They are able to give you a treatment within that 10 minutes.
Right.
That's their profession. Mental health is way more vast than that. That's not something that you can do in 10 minutes, right?
Correct.
So we are giving 1 hour of our day.
Yes.
It's our time, it's our effort that we're putting into this profession. So I feel like if we're charging maybe 500, a little more than the doctors do, I think
it makes sense.
It makes sense, yeah. And doctors get what? Like about 30, 40 patients a day?
Right.
We take only 5 per
Got
day.
it.
5 to 6 on an average.
Got it.
Right. So for us, in fact, now that it is improving in India, but a lot of psychologists are actually underpaid.
Right.
Right. So it's important to set up a system, to set up a regulation for such things where we make sure that we are providing quality help. At the same time, we're not overworking or, exploiting our profession as well.
Correct. Because there are only so many hours in a day and you have to run your life too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, because it didn't occur to me about the time element, but you're right. Doctors generally 10 minutes, but
they're able to
therapy
do
takes
it in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not that they
want
not giving their full efforts or not giving their everything to their diagnosis.
Yeah.
But your diagnosis just takes time and a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
Repeat sessions.
And it takes a lot of mental pressure on the therapist as well. Like, if you are hearing clients go through something so distressing and you're empathizing with it, you're going to have some sort of compassion fatigue as well.
Right. This emotionally
draining as well for a lot of therapists. So we do, it's not possible for us to take more than 6 sessions a day if we wanted to.
Right.
We do need a break in between. And if we're taking only 6 sessions a day, I feel like, the fee is valid.
Correct. Oh, it makes a lot of sense. And if anyone's providing quality service, whatever it is.
True.
Yeah.
And we're very, accommodating to people who can't afford it.
Got it.
Because at the end of the day, we realize that we are human beings, they are human beings.
Right.
They're not able to afford it. I mean, not only in my organization at Heart It Out, but a lot of places you go to a psychologist and you tell you're a student, they're more than willing to give you a discount.
Understood.
Or at least provide subscription plans or provide some sort of financial help just to make sure that you have access to therapy.
Understood.
Right? Just because you don't have, you're not able to afford it, it shouldn't mean that you don't deserve therapy, right?
Right.
So we try to make it as accommodating as possible. A student comes to us, we definitely provide a sliding scale of prices for them.
Okay.
So ensures that, me personally, earlier I used to provide, pro bono sessions as well.
Okay.
Like, I don't want to limit you and your access to therapy just because, it's expensive.
So, Aisha, in your own career, say 30 years from now, and I'm assuming that you want to be in the field of psychology and therapy, like, what would you like to accomplish? And when would you look back and say, okay, my life and my professional life has been successful?
I don't think I see this profession as, goals for me to achieve.
Okay.
I'm more of like, okay, let's see how it goes, go with the flow kind of person. That's how my personality is.
Right.
And I also don't aim to change people's lives. I don't think I have the power to change people's life. But if I'm able to create a small impact in their, daily life where if I'm able to change, create an impact to one person, maybe in the next 30 years, if one person comes up to me and says, you know what, I was, suffering from crippling anxiety, but the moment you taught me how to ground myself, your voice came into my head and, it taught me how to, manage my anxiety. I feel like that's more than enough.
You'll feel
for me. Yeah. So I'm, like I said, I'm not doing it to, change people's lives.
Right.
Small impacts for me is very satisfactory.
At least change an aspect of their life or help them manage something better.
Yeah. So even if they change their way of seeing things, I think that would be like, okay, I did something important.
No, but that's amazing, right? In the end, it's all about the little wins.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aisha. It was enlightening. And, I personally know nothing about this field. So for me, it was like, my questions were a way for me to educate myself, and I hope the audience felt the same way.
Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah, it was such a joy talking about things that I love doing. It
comes through.
Yeah, I mean, I love doing what I do. I love my job to the extent that, I'm more than willing to share my experiences with everybody. And I really recommend everyone to educate themselves to the field of psychology. Go for workshops, go for, there are so many YouTube channels these days who are educating them, educating people of the different ways of doing, ways of how they can approach a therapist or what psychology is, what mental health is.
Right.
I think really encourage the audience to educate yourself, be aware of yourself, go for workshops. Heart at Heart also provides a lot of workshops about various topics that are so important in today's day.
Right.
So put yourself out there to be aware of yourself at least.
Yes.
Even if you're not helping another person, if you want to figure out how you are doing, at least for that sake.
There's an important avenue that's often overlooked.
Yeah, exactly. So high encouragement for everybody to,
try this out.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you for spending your time here at the Strong Brew.
Thank
you. It was
you.
amazing. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for having me.